Imagine waking up one morning to find that your entire city, every house, every neighbor, every voice that once echoed through the streets, was gone. Not destroyed. Not conquered. Just gone. No signs of battle. No smoldering ruins. No corpses or trails of migration. Just silence, as if a giant hand had reached down from the heavens and erased an entire civilization from history. This is not a tale from mythology. This is the real story of a once mighty empire that vanished overnight. For centuries, historians believed that great civilizations only fell through conquest or decay. Rome crumbled after centuries of corruption. Egypt faded beneath waves of foreign invasions. But this empire, our empire, defied every rule of history. It did not fall gradually. It did not go out fighting. Instead, it disappeared without warning, as if swallowed by time itself. Who were these lost people? They built grand cities with towering stone walls and sophisticated drainage systems, long before Rome or Greece ever rose. Their trade networks stretched across deserts, seas, and mountains. Their artisans carved jewelry so intricate that even today's machines struggle to replicate it. They mastered metallurgy, engineering, agriculture, and astronomy with an intelligence that many argue rivals our own modern capabilities. They were not primitive. They were not forgotten nomads living in mud huts. They were engineers, scholars, priests, and warriors. And yet, one day, they were gone. No one wrote about their final hours. No neighboring kingdom recorded their fall. No survivors passed down stories of famine or war. It was as if history itself chose to look away. Centuries later, curious explorers stumbled upon something strange beneath layers of wind-blown sand and creeping jungle vines. A stone wall peeking through the brush. A half-buried statue with eyes staring toward the horizon. Entire marketplaces frozen in time, clay pots still sitting on stoves, tools abandoned mid-task, as if their owners had simply stepped out and never returned. What could erase a civilization so completely? Was it an earthquake that swallowed everything whole? Was it a sudden plague, killing everyone too quickly to flee? Did invaders destroy every trace of their existence and bury the evidence? Or was it something far stranger, a supernatural curse whispered through legend? Even more chilling, some locals still claim to hear sounds at night near the ruins. Footsteps on the crumbling staircases. Faint chanting in a language no one understands. As if the lost ones never truly left. But before we uncover the truth of their disappearance, we must first understand the world they built, a golden age of innovation and mystery. Because to grasp how shocking their vanishing was, you must first see how powerful they truly were. In this documentary, we won't just explore facts. We will step into their world, walk their streets, enter their temples, and witness their final moments. You're not just going to learn history, you're going to experience it. Over the next hour, we'll uncover how this hidden empire rose from obscurity to dominate vast territories. What their daily lives looked like, from royal palaces to humble kitchens. The secrets and rituals they practiced behind closed doors, some holy, some horrifying. The unseen threats that slowly crept toward them while they celebrated victories. And finally, the night everything ended. Most history is recorded by the victors. But this story? This story has no victor. Only questions. Only traces. Only ruins. Until now. So, what really happened to the empire that disappeared overnight? Did they fall? Did they flee? Or, are they still here in ways we don't yet understand? The truth has been buried for centuries. Today, we dig it up. They did not begin as conquerors or kings. They were farmers, quiet settlers scattered along a vast river plain. No one could have predicted that these humble people would one day command one of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. Their cities rose not with fanfare or temples to glory, but with precision and planning. Brick by brick, canal by canal, they built order where nature had once ruled. They did not worship chaos like their rivals. They mastered it. Most ancient civilizations began around a single powerful city that expanded by conquest. This civilization was different. It did not grow from one beating heart, it emerged like constellations across the landscape. Dozens of cities appeared across hundreds of miles, all built with the same architectural standard, the same measurements, the same bricks. It was as if the land itself had been given a blueprint. Other ancient settlements were clusters of random houses, dirt roads, and tribal borders marked by stones. These people built straight streets meeting at perfect right angles, forming vast grids like modern city blocks. Their drainage systems were so advanced that you could walk through their streets without stepping in mud, a luxury even medieval Europe never achieved. Every home, even those of the poor, had access to running water. Underground sewage ran beneath the city, sealed away with baked bricks, while wells stood between every few buildings. It was not merely functional, it was engineered with care for cleanliness and dignity. They knew that power was not just in weapons, it was in systems. But their greatness did not stop at city planning. Their craftsmen were magicians of stone and metal. They carved beads so small and perfect that even jewelers today struggle to replicate them without machines. They forged tools of copper and bronze, some sharpened so finely that modern metallurgists still marvel at their composition. Their seals, carved with symbols and animal motifs, suggest a complex language, enigmatic and undeciphered to this day. Each seal was likely a signature, a mark of ownership, a passport, or perhaps even a legal document. Whatever their purpose, one thing was clear: these were not primitive people. These were bureaucrats, traders, artisans, administrators. Their trade routes stretched like veins across the ancient world. Evidence of their pottery has been found in Mesopotamia, more than 1,000 miles away. In return, they received silver, gold, and lapis lazuli from distant lands. Imagine caravans moving across deserts and mountains carrying spices, cloth, and raw materials, long before armies like Rome or Persia even existed. They did not march with legions, they advanced with commerce. Unlike Egypt, they built no pyramids. Unlike Babylon, they erected no colossal statues of kings. There are no records of tyrants demanding eternal monuments. No tombs towering over the people. No writings praising great rulers. It is as if they believed no single man deserved to stand above the rest. Their cities had public baths and communal buildings, but no clear palaces. Scholars argue whether they even had kings at all, or whether they ruled through councils or priesthoods. In a world of despots and warlords, they stood as an anomaly. Peaceful, organized, and disciplined. However, peace does not mean weakness. Archaeologists uncovered evidence of standardized weapon molds and fortified walls. Their soldiers likely trained not for expansion but for defense. Their true enemies were not humans, they were rivers. The Indus River, both their guardian and destroyer, brought them life but also threatened to reclaim it. Floods could wipe away entire districts overnight, yet they adapted. They built raised platforms, strong embankments, and reservoirs to store water for droughts. Where others saw nature as chaos, they saw it as an equation to be solved. Their spiritual life was equally mysterious. They worshipped animals, bulls, elephants, and mythical beasts that resemble creatures from Hinduism thousands of years later. Small clay figurines of women suggest reverence for fertility and creation. Some scholars believe their traditions may be the earliest roots of the religion that would later become Hinduism. Their rituals left no grand temples, only small altars and symbols carved into stone. Perhaps their spirituality was not loud or ceremonial. Perhaps it was quiet and personal, much like their society itself. Their population reached into the millions, more than many European kingdoms thousands of years later. Their cities glowed at night with firelight reflecting off polished walls and copper tools. Children ran through narrow alleyways. Merchants shouted in markets. Farmers led buffalo carts through city gates. Musicians played drums and stringed instruments in crowded courtyards. It was a world alive, not just surviving, but thriving. And yet, despite all this greatness, they did not spread their influence through conquest. They did not colonize. They did not enslave. They did not burn the homes of their enemies to write epics of glory. They simply built, traded, and lived, quietly becoming one of the most advanced civilizations humanity had ever seen. But greatness, especially when peaceful, is fragile. When power is not centralized in one ruler, who stands to defend it? When a city has no king, who speaks when danger approaches? When people are taught that life is orderly and safe, can they see disaster when it comes? Because somewhere along the way, the signs began to appear. Rivers shifted their course. Trade partners grew silent. Foreign migrants arrived, knocking at the door. The earth trembled beneath them. The climate changed. Crops began to fail. Wells dried. And still, they endured, until they could not. The greatest cities began to shrink. Some were abandoned. Others were rebuilt smaller and poorer. Tools became cruder. Art became less refined. The order they had built slowly unraveled. But not through war. Not through invasion. Not through tyranny. Something else was happening. Something far greater. Something silent. A civilization that had stood for nearly 1,000 years was stepping toward its final night. And soon, the streets that once echoed with life would fall silent forever. If you walked through their streets at dawn, you wouldn't hear the clamor of chaos or the noise of unplanned life. You would hear rhythm. A quiet harmony between people and their city. The morning began not with alarms or bells, but with the soft creak of wooden carts and the low hum of voices preparing for the day. Women swept the front of their homes with handmade brooms, brushing dust into drains that carried it away beneath the earth. Men prepared livestock, oxen, goats, and water buffalo, before heading to nearby fields. Even in the earliest hours, the city felt awake but never frantic. Every movement had purpose. The homes themselves were marvels of uniformity. Built from sun-dried or baked bricks, they stood sturdy and square, with flat roofs and courtyards at the center. Some were modest, with only 1 or 2 rooms, while others sprawled like miniature palaces. But even the smallest dwelling held dignity. Each home had a private bathing area, something almost no other civilization offered to commoners. A sloped floor directed the used water into covered drains, keeping the living space clean. Hygiene was not a luxury. It was a right. Inside, clay lamps flickered against smooth walls. Pottery lined the shelves, some plain, some decorated with animal motifs. Jars stored grains, lentils, and spices. Grinding stone sat near the center, where women prepared flour each day. Children helped by fetching water from nearby wells, balancing clay pots against their hips with practiced ease. Breakfast was simple but nourishing. Flatbreads roasted over warm coals. Lentil stews simmered with spices. Fresh milk from buffalo or goats was poured into cups made of terracotta. Sometimes, fruit like jujube or dates were served, depending on the season. They did not eat for indulgence. They ate to continue the rhythm. By mid-morning, the city was fully alive. Merchants set up their stalls beneath woven canopies. They sold beads, metal tools, bangles, dyed cloth, and carved toys. Bartering was common, grain for pottery, fabric for tools, beads for spices. Some used small weights and scales, carefully calibrated to ensure fairness. Even trade was regulated by unseen standards. No coinage has been found, suggesting that trust and measurement ruled their economy more than minted authority. Children ran through the streets, playing with terracotta animals and wheeled carts. They carved figures with horns, perhaps imitating real bulls or animals from myths. It's easy to imagine their laughter echoing between brick walls, bouncing down alleyways like birdsong. Women wore long draped garments, sometimes adorned with jewelry made of shell or copper. Men wore wraparound cloth, similar to dhotis still worn in parts of South Asia today. Their hairstyles were neat, often tied back or braided. Artifacts show combs and cosmetic tools, proof that appearance was part of daily pride. But even amid the normalcy, there were rituals. In many homes, small altars were tucked into corners. Clay figurines, likely representing mother goddesses or fertility spirits, stood beside bowls of offerings. Incense may have been burned. Prayers were whispered not for conquest or domination, but for harvest, rain, and protection. At the edge of the city stood workshops, where the real magic happened. Metalworkers hammered bronze on stone anvils, sparks flying like fireflies. Potters shaped wet clay on spinning wheels, their fingers dancing with precision. Beadmakers sat patiently, drilling minuscule holes into stones so tiny they could balance on a fingernail. To them, beauty was measured not by size, but by perfection. Further out lay the fields. Farmers walked barefoot across narrow irrigation channels, guiding water with simple gates and tools. Barley and wheat waved in the wind like golden oceans. Sesame seeds grew in rows, their oil used for both food and lighting lamps. Domesticated animals followed obediently, knowing their routine as well as their masters. But as the sun climbed toward its peak, life slowed. People retreated indoors or rested beneath shade. Meals were shared in silence or quiet conversation. There was no rush to return to labor. Efficiency allowed them time to breathe. Evening brought a different kind of life. As temperatures cooled, the streets filled once more. Musicians appeared, drummers with stretched animal skins, flute players with instruments carved from bone or terracotta. Rhythms echoed against brick walls. Dancers spun in circles, their garments flowing like river currents. Community was not an idea. It was a sound. Stories were told not through writing, no deciphered texts remain, but through performance. Elders spoke of great floods, wandering spirits, and ancient beasts. Children listened with wide eyes, believing every word. Perhaps they warned of dangers yet to come. Perhaps those warnings went unheard. Night did not bring silence. Lamps burned along pathways. Rooftops became gathering places where people slept beneath the stars. Families lay together on woven mats, the sky their ceiling. In the distance, dogs barked at unseen shapes. The scent of smoke lingered in the air. Somewhere, water trickled through unseen channels below. There were no prisons. No clear signs of military barracks. No evidence of kings or generals proclaiming their rule. Yet law existed, quiet, invisible, but powerful. It lived in shared customs and mutual respect. Everyone knew their role. Everyone upheld the rhythm. The city did not fear invasion. It did not fear rebellion. It did not fear itself. But perhaps, that was the problem. Because those who live in perfect order often forget that the world around them is anything but. They mastered water, but did they anticipate when the river would betray them? They traded with distant lands, but did they foresee strangers arriving not as merchants, but settlers? They built drains to carry away waste, but could those same drains carry away disease? When life runs smoothly for too long, danger stops looking like danger. It starts looking like rumor. And so, while the drums played and children laughed under the warm glow of evening lamps, the foundation beneath their perfect world was already beginning to crack. They did not hear it. They did not feel it. But history did. Soon, the rhythm would break. Their lives were built on logic and order, yet beneath that polished surface lay a world of symbols, offerings, and whispered prayers. Religion for them was not thunderous or theatrical. There were no towering temples piercing the sky, no colossal gods carved from mountains. Their beliefs were quiet, woven into daily life like threads in cloth. They did not command the heavens, they negotiated with them. Archaeologists found no statues of mighty kings, but they did find small terracotta figurines of women with broad hips and exaggerated features, often seated or standing with hands on their stomachs. Some call them mother goddesses, symbols of fertility, birth, and protection. They were not idols of vanity, but guardians. In many homes, one of these figures would sit in a corner shrine, surrounded by tiny bowls that once held grains, milk, or flowers. Offerings. Bargains. Promises. Near them, another recurring figure appears, a horned man seated cross-legged, surrounded by animals. Some scholars compare him to later depictions of Shiva, the Hindu lord of beasts. Others say he was a shaman, a mediator between man and nature. His expression was calm, composed, almost watchful. As though judging not from above, but from among them. Animals were not just livestock. They were symbols with power. The bull, strong and fearless. The elephant, wise and enduring. The rhinoceros, rare and untamable. These creatures appeared on seals worn like amulets, pressed into clay to mark possessions, perhaps even to grant protection. Some seals depict scenes of sacrifice, animals tied before altars or humans in strange poses. But these are just interpretations. No one knows if those images depict rituals or myths. The truth is buried in silence. There are no great altars of blood, no mass graves suggesting cult violence. Yet traces of fire and ash in certain public spaces suggest communal ceremonies. Maybe they gathered not to fear their gods, but to thank them. Perhaps their worship was more gratitude than demand. But where gratitude ends, desperation begins. During times of flood or drought, did their offerings grow more intense? Did calm prayers become urgent chants? Did they sacrifice animals, or something more? Human sacrifice has not been proven, but clay figurines of people bound or kneeling hint at darker possibilities. Not all rituals are meant to be remembered. Some are meant to be buried. Their beliefs were not limited to shrines. They wore them. Beads carved from bone, shell, and semi-precious stones were strung into necklaces and bracelets. Some were simple. Others were too ornate to be mere decoration. A child wearing beads of precious stone was not just adorned, they were protected. A merchant with a seal depicting a tiger was not just marking his goods, he was declaring his spirit. Death, too, was treated with care. Unlike the grand pyramids of Egypt or the lavish tombs of Mesopotamian kings, they buried their dead with modesty. Bodies were laid on their sides, facing north. Beside them, pottery filled with food, tools, and ornaments, supplies for a journey. They believed in something beyond life, but not one ruled by terror. Their dead did not demand pyramids. They asked only for guidance. Some graves belonged to children, tiny bodies curled like they were sleeping. The care placed in burying them suggests that even the smallest life was sacred. If they believed in gods, they were gods of kindness, or gods who needed constant appeasement. At night, fires flickered in courtyards. Smoke curled into the sky like messages to unseen watchers. Drums beat slowly, steadily. Some dances were joyous, celebrating harvests or births. Others were slow, hypnotic, almost trance-like. Perhaps those were not dances at all, but invocations. The chants have been lost. The language they spoke remains undeciphered. No stone tablet has yet revealed their hymns or holy texts. But symbols repeat across their artifacts, waves, swastikas, intersecting circles, plants blooming from pots. Symbols of water, creation, cycles, rebirth. They saw life as a pattern, not a straight line. But patterns can break. Imagine a priest, or whatever holy role existed then, standing before a gathering beneath a starry sky. He, or she, for some figurines suggest women held spiritual authority, would have spoken of balance. Of the river's blessing. Of the sun's return. Of the ancestors beneath their feet watching over them. They believed the world was stable because they honored it. But what happens when the world stops listening? When floods came stronger, when droughts came longer, when foreign footsteps approached their city walls, did they plead louder? Did they blame themselves? Did they accuse one another of angering the gods? Unity is easy in prosperity. But in calamity, even the most orderly society begins to fracture. Rituals once meant for celebration may have turned into rituals of desperation. Offerings doubled. Fires burned longer. Songs became cries. Some homes show signs of hasty abandonment. Shrines left mid-prayer. Bowls tipped over as if someone ran before finishing their vow. Whatever protection they sought, it didn't arrive in time. Perhaps they stopped believing. Perhaps faith collapsed before the city did. Or perhaps faith remained while everything else crumbled. Their gods watched in silence as their worshippers disappeared. And now, thousands of years later, their symbols lie buried beneath soil and sand. Their prayer bowls filled not with offerings, but with dust. Their protectors, terracotta and stone, stare into emptiness, waiting for worship that will never return. They built a world of reason and devotion. But in the end, neither shielded them. What happens when a civilization loses not just its walls, but its certainty? That moment was coming. The rhythm of life had been perfect. But beneath the calm, something ancient and unstoppable was rising. Soon, the gods would go quiet. And so would the people. The warning signs did not appear as roaring disasters or sudden invasions. They appeared quietly, like faint cracks in a wall that no one notices until it collapses. It began with the river. The same river that had given them life for generations began to shift. At first, it was subtle. The water receded earlier in the year. The floods that once nourished their fields became unpredictable, too weak one season, too violent the next. Farmers noticed that their seeds no longer sprouted as easily. Wells that had never run dry began to sink into silence. Perhaps they dismissed it as a passing cycle. Nature had moods. It always recovered. But nature was not recovering this time. The river, their lifeline, was moving, slowly abandoning them for a new path. Crops failed more frequently. Food, once abundant, became measured. Grain jars emptied faster than they were filled. While the earth betrayed them from within, danger was gathering beyond their borders. Foreigners began appearing along the edges of their lands, nomadic herders, wanderers, people fleeing their own conflicts and disasters. They came not as conquerors, but as survivors. At first, they were tolerated. Travelers brought trade. Outsiders meant opportunity. But soon, settlement turned into intrusion. They built camps near the riverbanks. They grazed their animals on land that once belonged to the farmers of the city. Tension grew, not in violent clashes, but in silence. A farmer returning from his field might find strangers drawing water from his well. A shepherd might see foreign footprints beside his herd. Perhaps complaints were raised, but to whom? There were no mighty kings, no central council strong enough to enforce boundaries. A civilization built on trust had no weapons against subtle trespass. At the same time, strange illnesses began to whisper through the streets. Children who once laughed in the morning would cough through the night. Bodies grew weak even as food remained on the table. Was it disease from the stagnant drains? Or sickness brought by the wanderers from distant lands? The drains that had protected them for centuries may have become conduits for unseen plague. Disease does not need an army. It needs only one breath. Merchants returning from long journeys began reporting something else, a change in their trading partners. Cities far to the west, once bustling with foreign goods, now stood abandoned or weakened. Ships no longer arrived at ports when expected. Caravan routes fell silent. Maybe the world beyond was collapsing too. Empires do not fall alone. They drag others with them. Inside the city walls, something else shifted. The confidence of the people began to erode. Daily routines continued, but with unease. Ritual fires flickered with doubt. Some began abandoning traditional offerings, seeking newer gods, newer methods. Others doubled down, clinging to ritual like a lifeline. Division was born, not of language or race, but of belief. Did neighbors argue in hushed voices about omens? Did elders warn of forgotten curses? Were there whispers that someone among them had angered the gods? Without a king to blame, suspicion turns inward. A crack in faith became a crack in unity. Perhaps there were minor clashes between locals and migrants. Perhaps a field was seized by newcomers. Perhaps retaliation followed. But no great battle was recorded. No swords clashed in epic war. Their fall did not arrive with trumpets or burning cities, it seeped in like a poison. Slow. Invisible. Certain. As the river withdrew, many families likely made a decision. Quietly, without ceremony, they packed their belongings and left. Not to conquer new lands, but to find water, food, stability. They followed the river's new path, leaving behind their brick homes and empty wells. Some traveled east. Some west. Some never found a new home, swallowed by wilderness. Those who stayed faced the growing emptiness. Streets once crowded with traders became echoing corridors. Workshops fell silent. Kilns grew cold. Musicians stopped playing. The rhythm was fading. Even the animals must have sensed it. Carved seals from this later period show more aggressive creatures, lions, tigers, horned beasts, as if the people had begun invoking strength instead of peace. They were no longer content with symbols of order. They were asking for protection. But protection never came. The foreign settlers who once stood at the edges may have slowly absorbed the city. Not through conquest, but through occupation of emptiness. They moved into abandoned homes. They used the remaining wells. They learned the ways of the city, but not its soul. A civilization is not its bricks. It is its memory. And memory cannot be inherited by outsiders who never understood its rhythm. Perhaps there was one final attempt to resist decay. Evidence suggests that in later years, the people built makeshift walls and barriers, far cruder than their earlier architecture. A desperate attempt to defend themselves, not from armies, but from inevitability. But walls cannot hold back drought. Barriers cannot stop disease. Fear cannot rebuild unity. And so, their decline was not dramatic. It was quiet. A tapering flame. A song fading into silence. There was no single day of collapse. No final battle. Instead, there was a night when someone blew out their lamp, and no one lit it again. The greatest threat they faced was not a king with an army. It was time. Time, and the slow unraveling of everything they thought permanent. A civilization that believed in balance was undone when balance was lost. When a people no longer believe tomorrow will be like yesterday, they stop building. They stop dreaming. They stop staying. And soon, a city becomes a shell. A civilization becomes a memory. A people becomes a question. What happens when the greatest danger is not one enemy, but everything at once? They were about to find out. Nobody wakes up knowing they are living through the final days of a civilization. The people did not rise one morning and declare, "This is the end." Endings rarely arrive with clarity. They come disguised as inconveniences, then disruptions, then inevitabilities. What once felt temporary becomes permanent before anyone realizes it. In those last days, life must have continued in fragments. A potter still shaped clay on his wheel, though fewer buyers passed his stall. A mother still ground grain, though the bowl grew lighter each day. Children still played in dusty courtyards, but their laughter echoed off empty walls instead of bustling streets. Ritual fires still flickered, but offered no comfort. The city was alive, but hollow. The wells were the first to betray them. Villagers gathered around them every morning, hoping the water level had risen, hoping yesterday had been a mistake. But water does not negotiate. It receded slowly, cruelly, leaving behind only damp sand. People began to argue, not loudly, but desperately. Whose turn was it to draw water? Who had taken more than they needed? Who was wasting what little remained? Civility thinned like stretched cloth. Those with stronger backs or stubborn faith stayed. Those with children or fading patience prepared to leave. Every departure was quiet. No announcements, no farewells, just a lingering glance at the home they had built, an uncertain step toward the unknown. A neighbor might wake to find the house beside him empty, its door creaking in the wind. A marketplace might lose one vendor at a time until entire rows stood abandoned. The night must have become different too. At dusk, when lanterns once glowed in every window, darkness now fell heavier. No laughter drifted through the streets. No distant music floated from festival drums. Dogs barked at shadows no one investigated. In silence, fear grows teeth. Nature reclaimed what people abandoned. Vines crept across unused thresholds. Birds nested in cracks between bricks. Rodents scurried freely through buildings once swept daily. The sound of human chatter faded, replaced by insects humming in forgotten corners. Civilization was dissolving into wilderness before their eyes. Outside threats did not storm the gates. They seeped in, unnoticed. Travelers who once came to trade now arrived not with goods, but with hunger. Migrants camped at the outskirts, no longer waiting for permission to stay. A city built on order had no guard to enforce it. At first, the locals tolerated them. Pity, after all, was easier than conflict. But pity turns sour when scarcity arrives. A loaf of bread shared becomes a loaf of bread lost. Sharing becomes theft. Hospitality becomes tension. Perhaps a theft occurred at night. A granary broken into. A livestock pen left empty. Not by warriors, but by starving men. The damage was reparable, but the trust was not. Eyes narrowed. Doors were barred. Conversations grew cautious. A community once united by cooperation now splintered into survival. Even faith fractured. The priests continued their rituals, but the fires burned lower. Offerings grew smaller. Some people still believed the gods were merely testing them. Others whispered that they had already been abandoned. A few, in desperation, tried new rituals, strange chants from foreign tongues, small idols tucked secretly beneath pillows. The sacred became negotiable. One can imagine the riverbank, the place that had been the heart of the city. Once, it echoed with laughter, with women washing clothes, with merchants unloading boats. Now, only a trickle of water glided along a new path, avoiding the docks like a guest refusing an invitation. The wooden platforms stood empty, creaking in the breeze. Ropes frayed. Oars rotted. Boats sat stranded in mud like relics of a forgotten era. And still, no one declared the end. They spoke instead in cautious hope. Maybe next season the rains will return. Maybe the wells will fill. Maybe the newcomers will move on. Hope is the last citizen to leave a dying city. But hope does not grow crops. Hope does not heal sickness. Hope cannot refill a river. The final breaking point may not have been dramatic. It may have been as simple as a vote unspoken, a collective exhaustion. One morning, a group of families, larger than usual, must have gathered at the gates with packs on their backs. Others watched, unsure whether to join or to judge. The ones who left did not look back. The ones who stayed felt the weight of their choice settle like dust. And then, something shifted. Silence became louder than words. Doors remained closed longer. Tools lay untouched. The forges cooled. The clay dried on half-formed pots. Why finish today what may never be needed tomorrow? Perhaps there was one final gathering, at the temple, in the central square, or beneath a sacred tree. Not a ceremony, but a moment of reckoning. No speeches, just faces lit by dim torches, eyes searching for answers no one could give. They must have felt it, the realization that they were witnessing the last breath of something vast, something ancient, something they had thought eternal. There is a unique grief in watching not a person, but a world die. Eventually, the city surrendered, not to invasion or to fire, but to apathy. When enough people stopped believing it could continue, it simply didn't. A final door was closed. A final fire was extinguished. A final footprint was pressed into the dust. And then, nothing. No chronicler was there to record it. No poet carved elegies into stone. No soldier planted a flag in victory. The city did not fall, it was simply left behind. Its last residents walked away, each step erasing history beneath their sandals. By dawn, the city still stood, but it no longer belonged to humans. It belonged to silence. For centuries after the last footsteps faded, the abandoned city did not crumble overnight. It lingered, half standing, half sinking, like a memory refusing to be forgotten. Walls that once echoed with laughter now whispered only to the wind. The great halls, once filled with voices, were now homes to lizards and nesting birds. Columns that held up roofs now held only vines. The city became a skeleton, its bones intact, its soul gone. Nature did not destroy it with violence. It smothered it gently. Dust carried by wind settled in layers across floors and courtyards. Each passing year added another thin blanket of sand. Rain softened rooftops. Sunlight cracked mud bricks. Roots from trees crept into foundations, prying them apart inch by inch. Slowly, the city disappeared, not through collapse, but through burial. Travelers passed nearby, unaware they were walking atop an empire. Shepherds grazed their animals where marketplaces once bustled. Some may have found odd stones carved by hands long dead. Some may have picked up strange seals or beads without knowing they were holding the signatures of forgotten kings. Children must have played with relics that belonged in museums. Farmers likely dug up pottery while plowing, shrugging before tossing it aside like useless debris. Legends may have survived even when names did not. Villagers might have whispered of spirits beneath the sands, of cursed ruins where strange shapes emerged in moonlight. Some stories preserve truth without ever knowing its roots. Perhaps they told of a city swallowed by the earth for defying the gods. Perhaps they believed the silence was intentional, that something below was not meant to be disturbed. And so, the lost civilization slept. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell above its corpse. New conquerors redrew maps. New languages were spoken. New gods were worshipped. Meanwhile, beneath a thin layer of dust, the old world waited, patient, undisturbed, as if holding its breath. Then came curiosity. Not from kings or warriors, but from scholars. Men with notebooks instead of swords. Women with brushes instead of shields. They did not seek conquest, they sought memory. At first, it must have seemed insignificant. A mound in the desert. A cluster of odd formations in the clay. But to trained eyes, the ground itself speaks. They noticed the alignment of buried walls beneath the soil. They saw patterns no shepherd would care to see. They felt that beneath their feet rested symmetry, something only humans could build. With cautious hands, they began to dig. The first discovery was likely small. A brick, unusually uniform. A pottery shard with unfamiliar markings. A seal carved with an animal unlike any seen in known empires. One find led to another. Soil became doorway. Stone became wall. Brushstrokes revealed inscriptions that matched no known script. The explorers realized they were not uncovering ruins of a city, they were unearthing an entire civilization. Excitement mixed with disbelief. How could something so vast vanish so completely? How could an empire leave no kings in history books, no legends in foreign chronicles, no monuments still standing? The silence itself became part of the mystery. As they dug deeper, the city awakened in fragments. Streets emerged in perfect grids. Houses, identical in size and layout, revealed a society where uniformity mattered more than power. Workshops were found still stocked with tools, as if the craftsmen had intended to return. Wells and baths hinted at complex engineering. Granaries stood empty but intact. Then came the bodies, buried not in royal tombs, but in simple graves. No glorious burial masks or golden ornaments. Just bones, resting peacefully beneath layers of history. The archaeologists realized something astonishing: this civilization had been equal. Not ruled by towering kings, but perhaps by councils or shared order. A society without tyrants, yet no one remembered their names. More artifacts emerged, thousands of tiny seals, carved with animals, gods, and symbols. But unlike other civilizations, there were no clear depictions of war. No chariots. No swords. No victory inscriptions. It was as if they simply refused to glorify conflict. The researchers stared at these remnants with awe. They had found something rare, not just a city, but an idea. A world built not on conquest, but on cooperation. Not on thrones, but on balance. But the greatest mystery remained. There were no signs of destruction. No scorch marks from burning. No collapsed walls from siege. No mass graves from sudden disaster. They had not been slaughtered. They had not been conquered. They had simply left. This absence of violence was more haunting than ruins of war. It was as if an entire population had stood up one day and walked away in silence. No ruler to rebel against. No threat to flee from. Just a quiet agreement that it was time to abandon everything. The archaeologists recorded their findings meticulously. But in quiet moments, brushing dust from carved stone, they must have felt something deeper. A presence. A question. A whisper from beneath the soil. Will you remember us? Because that is what ruins ask of the living. Not to conquer them. Not to solve them like puzzles. But to witness. To listen. And so, the lost empire lived again, not in bricks and streets, but in the minds of those who rediscovered them. Museums displayed their seals. Scholars studied their language. Children learned of them in books. A civilization once erased by time was spoken aloud again. They had disappeared without a word. But when they returned, they spoke louder than ever, not in sound, but in silence. Their legacy was not in what they built, but in how they vanished. And the world, hearing their echo through dust and time, finally asked, what kind of society leaves behind no conquerors, no tyrants, no heroes? What kind of people choose disappearance over domination? And perhaps most haunting of all, could it happen to us? The rediscovery of the lost civilization did more than fill museum shelves. It held up a mirror to the present. It forced scholars, leaders, and ordinary people to ask a question far more unsettling than how they disappeared. It made them wonder if we might be next. After all, this forgotten empire was not primitive. They had clean water systems when other cultures still drank from muddy rivers. They had standardized weights and measures before most kingdoms even had coins. They had urban planning so precise that their cities looked like they had been designed by modern engineers. They traded across thousands of miles without armies. They managed complex societies without kings or empires carved in gold. And yet, they fell. Not to war. Not to invasion. Not to plague alone. They fell because everything that sustained them, water, climate, economy, unity, shifted just enough to unbalance them. It was not one disaster. It was a combination. A slow squeeze instead of a fatal strike. Does that sound familiar? Modern society prides itself on progress, technology, and resilience. Yet beneath our towering skyscrapers and glowing screens lies the same fragile dependency on systems we barely understand. Our rivers still decide where people live. Our crops still depend on the moods of the sky. Our social stability is still bound to trust, cooperation, and belief in a shared future. The difference is, we pretend we are immune. The lost civilization did not know they were in danger until it was too late. Perhaps we are no different. Climate shifts. We call it temporary. Economic strain. We expect it to fix itself. Social division. We scroll past it, mute it, ignore it. Like them, we may think tomorrow will resemble today, until one day it doesn't. Their fall was not explosive. It was quiet. And that is what makes it terrifying. Because societies rarely collapse with flames and battles. They erode. Piece by piece. Faith first. Then stability. Then structure. Like a rope unraveling fiber by fiber. Imagine modern cities slowly emptying, not because of war, but because of water shortages, rising temperatures, or food scarcity. Imagine cities divided not by walls but by distrust. Imagine migration not as invasion, but as necessity, millions on the move, not seeking conquest, but survival. Would we handle it differently than they did? Some argue that their downfall was inevitable, that they were too dependent on a single river, too rigid in their systems to adapt. That may be true. But modern civilization is just as dependent, not on one river, but on one grid, one internet, one global supply chain, one fragile balance that pretends to be unbreakable. If a single region stops producing microchips, the world trembles. If fuel lines are blocked for a week, nations panic. If internet cables are severed, chaos follows. Our world appears vast, but its foundations are thin. The lost people teach us something uncomfortable. Strength is not measured by what you build, but by how well you endure change. They mastered stability, but stability betrayed them. When the river moved, they could not. When the climate shifted, they held on to old patterns instead of forging new ones. Their greatness became their weakness. Perhaps our greatest risk is the same, mistaking comfort for permanence. Their silence is not a mystery. It is a warning. A warning against overconfidence. A warning against ignoring subtle decline. A warning against assuming civilization always moves forward. History does not progress in a straight line. Sometimes, it folds back on itself, swallowing empires whole. But their story also offers hope. Even in disappearance, they left behind no signs of tyranny, no monuments to conquest. They built cities without kings. They thrived without war. They proved that a peaceful, cooperative society can flourish for centuries. They showed humanity not only how to live, but how to live well. Their fall should not only frighten us. It should guide us. What if we learned from their mistakes? What if, instead of waiting for collapse, we recognized when the river begins to recede? What if we saw crisis not as an enemy, but as a warning bell? Adaptation is not cowardice. It is wisdom. They stayed too long in a land that no longer sustained them. They trusted systems that no longer served them. They believed stability was guaranteed. We must not. The story of their disappearance is not over. It continues in every city struggling with drought. In every community debating over borders and resources. In every political divide tearing nations apart. In every false confidence that tomorrow will look like today. The question is not whether civilizations fall. They always do. The question is whether they fall with violence, or with dignity. The lost people chose the latter. They did not die screaming. They did not leave smoldering ruins. They walked away quietly, preserving life over pride. Maybe that is their final lesson. Collapse does not have to be destructive. Sometimes, survival means letting go. Sometimes, the bravest act is not fighting to stay, but knowing when to leave. Today, if you stand where their city once thrived, you will not hear battle cries or the roar of conquest. You will hear wind. You will hear sand whispering against stone. You will hear silence so complete that it almost feels alive, as if the city itself is holding its breath, waiting to be acknowledged. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, not because it was poorly built, but because time has buried precision under layers of dust. What once were streets are now ridges. What once were walls are now faint outlines beneath hardened soil. You may see fragments, a brick corner stubbornly jutting out, a half-carved stone basin, a clay pot broken but not forgotten. Nothing stands tall, yet everything remains present. This place is not empty. It is paused. Archaeologists walk through with brushes and notebooks, speaking in hushed tones as if afraid to disturb the dead. Tourists, if any, move slowly, unsure whether to take photos or simply bow their heads. There is reverence here, not born of religious sanctity, but of human humility. You are not standing in ruins. You are standing in memory. Close your eyes, and the landscape shifts. The wind becomes voices. Footsteps echo where none walk. The faint scent of baked bread seems to drift from nowhere. You can almost hear laughter, not loud or wild, but calm, steady, the laughter of people who believed their world would last forever. You picture a marketplace where now there is only dust. Traders arranging goods on mats, women bargaining over grain, children chasing each other between stalls. You picture water flowing where there is now only cracked earth, shining under sunlight, splashing against stone basins, echoing with chatter as hands dipped in cool relief. You imagine a craftsman, sitting cross-legged beside his kiln, shaping a clay bowl with practiced ease. You imagine the heat on his face, the pride in his eyes, the certainty that someone would soon use what he had made. That bowl might now be shattered beneath your feet, or displayed in a museum thousands of miles away. Either way, his hand is still on it. There are no statues of rulers here. No engraved walls shouting the names of kings. Their legacy is not carved in boastful stone, it is carved in silence. They left behind no tyrants to remember, only citizens. No heroes. No villains. Only people. Perhaps that is why this place feels so haunting. It is not a monument to power. It is a monument to life. You walk further, your steps stirring faint clouds of dust. Every footfall feels intrusive, like walking across sacred ground. Not because this was a temple, but because this was someone's home. Families once ate dinner here. Friends once argued here. Lovers once whispered here. 1,000 ordinary days were lived in this very spot, now compressed into stillness. You wonder, did they know we would one day stand here? Did they imagine curious strangers brushing away earth to rediscover their world? Did they hope for it? Or did they assume, like most of us do, that their story would continue unbroken? You kneel beside a low wall, tracing your fingers across its rough surface. The texture is familiar, baked mud pressed by human hands. The same kind of brick used across their entire city, each nearly identical. Uniformity was not oppression here. It was harmony. No man built higher than another. No tower overshadowed the rest. Equality was not a slogan, it was architecture. You realize something profound: their greatness was not in what they invented, but in how they lived together. And then another realization follows: their disappearance does not make them weak. It makes them human. They faced forces far beyond their control: shifting rivers, changing climates, migrations of people, invisible diseases. They did not fall because they were primitive. They fell because they were mortal. The silence around you is not shame. It is testament. Even in abandonment, their city refuses to die completely. It clings to existence, not in grandeur, but in fragments. In broken pottery. In carved seals. In the faint outlines of drains that once carried away water with mathematical precision. These are not relics of failure. They are reminders of effort. People lived here. They tried. They built. They hoped. And one day, when hope could no longer sustain them, they left, not as victims, but as survivors seeking another beginning. You stand up slowly, brushing the dust from your hands. The sun is high overhead now, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. The ruins do not glow with majesty. They do not demand awe. They simply exist. And somehow, that is more powerful than any towering monument. For in their quiet endurance, they ask you a question no history book can phrase: when your world begins to fade, will you cling to it blindly? Or will you know when it is time to walk away? You take one last look before leaving. You know that in a few seconds, the wind will erase your footprints as if you were never here. But you also know, something has changed within you. You came to visit the past. But the past has visited you. Long after you leave the ruins, the silence follows you. It sits in the back of your mind, like a question you never quite answer. You go back to your world of glass towers and glowing screens, of traffic lights and grocery aisles, of clocks ticking with perfect precision. But something feels different now. You've seen how easily time swallows certainty. You've seen how an entire civilization can vanish so completely that the earth itself forgets, until someone digs deep enough to remember. For so long, history has told stories of victory and conquest. Kings who ruled. Warriors who slaughtered. Empires that expanded through blood and iron. But here, you found something else, a civilization that left behind no tyrants, no wars, no monuments of domination. They did not write their legacy in gold. They did not carve their names into mountains. They simply lived well, and when the world shifted beneath them, they walked away. No dramatic last stand. No final war. No burning city. Just quiet dignity. That silence is louder than any conquest. It makes you wonder, what does it truly mean to be remembered? Is legacy measured by the height of monuments? By the number of victories? Or by the way a society treated its own people? The people of this lost empire may not have left us legends of kings, but they left us something far more enduring, proof that humanity is capable of cooperation without oppression. Of complexity without cruelty. Of progress without violence. They remind us that greatness does not always roar. Sometimes, it whispers. Sometimes, it leaves no words at all. But their disappearance also forces another reflection: how fragile even the best of worlds can be. They mastered stability, until stability betrayed them. They trusted the river, until it left. They built in unity, until unity cracked. We like to believe we are different. Stronger. Smarter. Untouchable. Yet beneath our technological armor, we remain as vulnerable as they were, dependent on water, food, trust, balance. We build higher, but we are no less breakable. The truth is unsettling: every civilization thinks it will last forever. None do. One day, someone may walk through the ruins of our cities. They may stand in the shells of skyscrapers, wondering who we were. They might find plastic beneath layers of soil and marvel at its longevity. They might uncover faded billboards and wonder why we worshipped brands instead of gods. They might see our cities laid out from above and think, they were organized. They were brilliant. They were proud. And then they will ask, what happened to them? Will our downfall be as quiet as theirs? Or will it be loud? Will we vanish like smoke? Or will we burn like fire? Perhaps the greatest gift this ancient civilization offers us is not just knowledge, but perspective. They remind us that humans have walked this earth for thousands of years, building, rebuilding, rising, falling. The ground beneath every city is layered with the bones of forgotten worlds. Ours will join them one day. But collapse does not erase existence. Even in silence, they speak. Not through words, but through presence. Their bricks still hold fingerprints. Their drains still follow perfect angles. Their beads still carry color. Their seals still show lions roaring in stone. They may not have shouted their names across time, but they carved their humanity into the ground itself. And we found it. So perhaps legacy is not about being remembered by everyone. Perhaps it is about being remembered rightly. Not for how loud we were, but for how well we lived. That is the challenge they leave us, to build a world not just strong, but kind. Not just advanced, but thoughtful. Not just vast, but rooted in wisdom. Because one day, we too will be silent. And when strangers dig through what we leave behind, what will they see? A world that consumed without thinking? Or a world that cared? A society that fractured over differences? Or one that found strength in common ground? Will they say, they were powerful? Or will they say, they were good? We do not get to choose how long our civilization lasts. But we do get to choose how it lives. The lost empire did not leave behind conquerors or tyrants. They left behind order, balance, cooperation, and quiet departure. They did not seek immortality. Yet here we are, speaking of them. Maybe that is immortality after all. Not to be eternal, but to echo. Long after scholars have debated their origins, long after documentaries have speculated about their fall, one reality remains: they were here. They lived, they walked, they hoped, and for a while, they believed their world would never fade. But time is the great equalizer, and no matter how advanced a society may be, time does not ask for permission before reclaiming it. What lingers most from their story is not the mystery of how they vanished, but the haunting idea that they did everything right, and still disappeared. They were peaceful. They were organized. They were intelligent. They were resourceful. And yet, even perfection could not protect them from impermanence. That truth unsettles us, because it means no amount of progress can guarantee survival. Not theirs. Not ours. Perhaps that is why we cling so desperately to history. Not just to remember the past, but to reassure ourselves, we will not be forgotten. Every monument, every book, every archive is a plea to the future: see us. Know we existed. Do not let us vanish silently. The lost civilization did not make such pleas. They left no boastful inscriptions, no songs carved into stone, no desperate attempts to immortalize their names. And yet, here we are, speaking of them. It makes you wonder, is legacy something we build, or something others choose to grant us? Maybe immortality is not in writing your name across the world, but in living so meaningfully that future generations want to discover you. Perhaps that is why, when archaeologists unearth their artifacts, they handle them with such reverence. They are not merely studying objects, they are listening to voices. A broken pot is not just clay. It is the last whisper of someone who held it. A seal is not just art. It is a declaration: I was here. I mattered. Even the drains in their streets speak, not in words, but in logic. Precision. Care. Every line they laid in brick was a quiet oath that they believed in tomorrow. But tomorrow betrayed them. Or perhaps it didn't. Maybe they understood something we do not. Maybe they realized that survival does not always mean staying in one place. Maybe their departure was not defeat, but evolution. They did not stay and crumble. They spread. They blended. They became part of others. Their blood may run through countless descendants who have no idea where their lineage began. Their culture may have dissolved, not into nothingness, but into everything around them. Sometimes extinction is not an end, it is absorption. We search for them in ruins, but perhaps their truest legacy is not buried in dirt. It is scattered across continents, hidden in features of faces, in forgotten customs, in patterns of trade and speech that traveled further than their bricks could. History often obsesses over kings with recorded names. But the unnamed many, farmers, mothers, craftsmen, leave deeper marks in silence than rulers leave in stone. Maybe the reason their disappearance feels so tragic is because we see ourselves in them. We too build systems and cities and comforts, believing they will last. We too assume our calendars will keep turning. But deep inside, we fear the same fate. Not war. Not conquest. Oblivion. The fear of not being remembered is not unique to civilizations. It lives in every human heart. Every artist leaves a signature. Every lover carves initials into wood. Every child builds sandcastles, only to watch the tide erase them, but in that moment, they understand something profound: everything we build is temporary. But building it still matters. The lost civilization teaches us that disappearing does not mean failing. Oblivion is not the enemy. Indifference is. They did not leave behind stories of cruelty or oppression. They left behind evidence of care. Their streets were clean. Their systems were fair. Their homes were equal. If their world had to vanish, at least it vanished with grace. Maybe that is all any society can hope for, not to live forever, but to live well enough that when time finally erases our footprints, it does so gently. And so, as the dust settles back into the ruins, as wind carries away the echoes of your steps, you begin to understand that history is not just a record of victories and losses. It is a conversation between the living and the dead. Between the remembered and the forgotten. You came searching for answers, but instead, you found a mirror. Because the real question is not what happened to them. The real question is, what will happen to us? Will we vanish with violence or with dignity? Will we leave ruins of chaos or ruins of harmony? When time comes to cover our cities under layers of dust, will the silent wind whisper of greed, or of humanity? The past cannot change. But the future is still listening. And so, the last grain of sand slips through the hourglass. Our journey through forgotten streets and silent chambers comes to an end, but the story refuses to stay buried. Once you glimpse the life of a world that vanished without goodbye, you cannot simply walk away unchanged. Because now you carry their memory. That is the unspoken contract between the past and the present. Once you learn about those who came before, you inherit responsibility. You become the bridge between obscurity and remembrance. Their voices cannot speak across time, but yours can. You are now the proof that they mattered. That they are not completely gone. Perhaps that is why their ruins affect us so deeply, even when we know nothing of their language or names. It's not just curiosity, it's kinship. We recognize their hopes in ours. Their routines mirror our own. Somewhere in those ancient alleyways, a child once ran laughing. Somewhere in those kitchens, someone stirred a pot and wondered about tomorrow. Somewhere on a rooftop, someone looked up at the moon, the same moon we see tonight, and asked the same questions we still cannot answer. Who are we? Why are we here? Will anything we build outlast us? History often glorifies conquest, kings, and wars. But in truth, the beating heart of civilization is ordinary life. And that is why this lost world feels so sacred. They were not legends carved in exaggerated stories. They were real. They were human. And they were mortal. Their disappearance is not just a cautionary tale, it is a prophecy. Every city today, no matter how strong, how advanced, how proud, stands on borrowed time. Skyscrapers may rise where temples once stood, but concrete cracks just as easily as stone. Our technology may shield us from threats they could not imagine, yet our vulnerabilities are eerily similar. Climate, conflict, complacency, time cycles, history echoes. No empire has ever outlived time. But maybe survival is not about lasting forever. Maybe survival is about being remembered well. The lost civilization left behind no grand statues demanding admiration. No records insisting on their greatness. They left behind something far more powerful, evidence of fairness, cleanliness, order, cooperation. While the world around them was filled with warlords and empires built on blood, they chose a different path. They proved that humans do not need kings to be civilized. They proved that progress does not require dominance. They proved that peace is not weakness, it is discipline. In that sense, they did not fail. They transcended. And now, centuries later, we are rediscovering them, not as conquerors, but as teachers. Not as relics, but as reminders that greatness is not always loud. So what do we do with that lesson? We reflect. We ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. If our civilization were to disappear tomorrow, what would remain of us? What traces would strangers in the far future find beneath our ruins? Would they be impressed by our compassion, or horrified by our carelessness? Would they marvel at our innovation, or shake their heads at our waste? Would our legacy be one of unity, or of endless division? Time will answer. It always does. But in this moment, before the dust settles, we still have a choice. We are not yet forgotten. Our story is still being written. And perhaps that is the greatest gift the past can offer, not answers, but urgency. So let us honor those who vanished not by pitying them, but by learning from them. Let us build not for the illusion of immortality, but for the comfort of knowing that when our own echoes fade, they will fade with grace. The ruins behind us are silent now, but they do not feel empty. They feel like a message carved not in stone, but in time itself. Live well. Build wisely. Leave softly. And when your time comes, disappear with dignity. Because one day, someone will stand over our remains the way we stand over theirs now. And as the wind whispers across forgotten ground, they will ask the same question we asked: who were they? The real answer will not be found in monuments or machines, but in how we treated each other. If the ancient world could speak, perhaps it would not tell us how it fell. It would simply say, do not wait for the end to realize what truly matters. And so, with that final whisper from the past, we step away from their world, not as spectators, but as students. Their story may be over. Ours is not.